I have to take a second and say a huge thank you to my first half of the season sponsor, which is A Simple Farm. I am honored to work alongside a business who I truly believe in their passion, their purpose, and their product. And A Simple Farm is just that. There is nothing better than working with a family-owned and operated business. They're nestled in the heart of rural Wabash County and is inspired by country living, handmade traditions, and a deep love for herbal and medicinal plants. From handcrafted soaps and herbal salves to cozy home goods and repurposed creations, each product is thoughtfully made using nature-inspired ingredients and a passion for simple, natural living. Rooted in creativity, heritage, and old-fashioned farmhouse values, A Simple Farm celebrates the healing beauty of herbs, the comfort of handmade goods, and the charm of a slower way of life in rural Indiana. Folks, you're going to want to pick up some of their products, so make sure you head over to A Simple Farm on Facebook and Instagram, and I'll have their website linked below so you can just easily click on any of their platforms and you can find them automatically. Like I said, I truly believe in them. And Kristen Reynolds, if you want to learn more about her, there's 2 articles on my website, and there's a podcast with Kristen Reynolds and her son Vincent. So make sure you head over to season 1 of Here in My Time and you can hear their interview. My returning sponsor of Turn the Page Books and Music Store is the place to go to find your next read or your next record to add to your collection. It is all about the atmosphere of this place. As soon as you walk through the door, you are hit with the most magnificent lighting, the wooden floors, the smell of old books, and of course, the sound of flipping through LPs. What could be any better than that? Well, Rex. Rex is the owner of Turn the Page Books and Music Store. He is just the man to see about anything to do with music. So make sure you head over there and support him on Facebook, on Instagram, and of course, just stop by at the store. You will not want to leave. Thank you, Rex, for supporting this season. It's such an honor. Now, on to the episode. This is Here in My Time, the podcast dedicated to bridging the gap between generations. I'm your host, Lauren Hunt, a local personal journalist, photographer, documentarian, and quite frankly, just someone who loves stories and the people who tell them. Today, I am here with Heather Schilling, and I am so glad she said yes. I actually had a connection through Carol Gebert, who was on the podcast last season. And I think we're in for a big treat today. We have been talking up here in the studio, getting photos, and it's just been a pleasure talking to her. So thank you so much, Heather, for being here.
You're welcome.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? And just a little bit about your childhood, okay?
Okay, sure. So I grew up in North Manchester, Indiana. My parents met in high school in Columbia City. And my dad got a teaching job at Manchester High School. This would have been the 70s, early 70s. And my sister and I were born in not in North Manchester, but in Columbia City. And so our parents raised us there until about I want to say the early 70s, maybe like 1972 or 73. And then we moved to Muncie for a little bit when Manchester cut their French program, and my dad then had to figure out what he wanted to do after losing his teaching job. So he joined my mom in grad school at Ball State. And so that's how we ended up for a little bit of time in Muncie, and which was a whole other childhood, growing up or spending a couple years in Muncie. And then my parents got divorced when I was 10, so probably about 1976. And because my dad had such a support group in North Manchester, he moved me and my sister and then my 18-month-old brother back to North Manchester, and I've been there pretty much ever since.
But you've, just that's a lot of lifespan right there of just experience, right? What were you like as a kid? How would you describe yourself as a kid?
I was inquisitive. I asked a lot of questions. I'm a talker. I got in trouble for talking all the time. In fact, one of my grandma's favorite stories was my mom had called her and said that Heather wasn't feeling well. And so my grandpa came down from Columbia City to pick me up. and I talked nonstop all the way back to Columbia City. I wasn't sick. I was homesick from my grandparents, but I just gab. And then I also remember my grandma often saying, Heather Annie, be still. Just be still. And I bring up my grandma because she was pretty important in my life, and had a huge impact. But I just asked a lot of questions. In fact, I still have the book my dad gave me. I think I was probably 10 or 11, and it's the Book of Why. Because I would always ask, why are we doing this? What is this? What are we going to do next? All those kinds of questions. And I'm pretty gregarious. I love people. I love throwing events. I just love being involved. So that's I think I've been that way my entire life.
Well, that's cool. I mean, knowing what I know about you and what you've just told me a little bit off the air, you've done a lot with people, right? And we'll get into that. I can't wait for people to hear just the amazing impact that you and your life and everything has done so far, and is going to do in the community. But I'd love to stay at this for a second. You brought up your grandma. Can you tell me a little bit why she was such an impact and just things that mean a lot?
So my grandparents, again, they lived in Columbia City. Just good, hardworking, blue-collar people. My grandpa worked at a factory in Ligonier, and they also ran a bait shop, collected antiques, those kinds of things. But my mom, and she had I think 3 siblings who were still living. But my mom and my dad and my aunt and uncle every weekend would go back to Columbia City, and I feel like we spent the whole weekend there. I'd have to ask one of my parents the timeline, but as a kid, I just have this memory of always being at Grandma and Grandpa's. And my grandparents, I'm the oldest granddaughter or grandchild, and they had 4 granddaughters in a 2-year span.
Wow. So
I'm the oldest granddaughter, and then my cousin Julie is 11 months younger, and then her sister Lori is less than 2 years younger than me, and then my sister is just a little over 2 years younger than me. So they had 4 granddaughters in a 2-year span, and it was just idyllic to be there. It was, there was always music. We got to play. We got to help Grandma in the kitchen. It was just a safe space and a fun space to be a kid. Yeah.
Isn't that like grandparents, though? I mean, there's something about the environment that I don't know what it is, but I don't know if they're intentional about that or how it works. But every time I think about my grandparents and growing up, I just remember that same thing. The music and being around and feeling like you could just do whatever you want and yet still feel very safe and comfortable and loved.
Yeah.
And I don't know what is it about.
Well, I think and I'm not a grandma yet. I'm hopeful that I'm going to be a grandma at some point.
Yeah.
But I also think, like, as I've aged and you really get a little bit more wise about the world. You really do. And I didn't believe that when I was like in my 30s. But now that I'm pushing 60, it's like, oh yeah, there's a whole lot of wisdom that comes with living. And I also think that grandparents, as parents, your focus is on raising those kids. But as grandparents, it's really just about spoiling and loving.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, you also have a different perspective of parenting at that point, because you've made it to a point where your kids are sufficient. You're like, oh yeah, this does work.
Yeah.
It does work. Yeah. So I don't know. I think, I think there's a joy in being a parent, but then I think there's a different kind of joy in being a grandparent and watching your own children be parents.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My mom and dad are going to be grandparents for the first time in probably by August, I think. And it's so cool even just to watch them now prepare to be grandparents. Yeah. I get to see them in a whole different light, which is so cool. I mean, there's different phases in a child's life with their relationship with their parents, because it's like, okay, they're my mom and dad, and then they kind of turn into, a friend, and not fully just a friend, but like it was just, there's these different phases, and now I get to see my mom in this whole new world of just like, can't wait to see her hold the kid for the first time. I'm very excited about that. I love that. What is probably the biggest lesson you learned from your grandparents, do you think?
The biggest lesson I probably learned several. One is resiliency, right? That things can be hard. I mean, they weren't rolling in money, but they always had what they needed, right? And but I think probably the biggest lesson I learned from them was how to be a good person, and how to be a good person to other people. And when you give freely, you receive freely. And it's that, just that sense of being part of something bigger than yourself, and giving to your neighbors. I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons I learned from them. Wow. My grandma didn't know a stranger. So I'm telling you, like, they did, neither one knew a stranger. They could be best friends with someone they meet on a bus.
I love it.
Yeah, I think that's where I get my gift of gab from my grandma.
Well, and I think I can see that in you. Not the gift of the gab necessarily, but that gift of making a friend wherever you go. You have that kind of personality to you. And I just met you. Literally, we had a little phone call before this, but like just meeting you, I can see that personality in you. And I think that's special. Not everybody has that, or I shouldn't say gets that, but has that, I should say, or cultivates that. There we go. There's the word. Yeah, I gotcha. I was going to get it at some point.
I get it.
If anybody knows me, knows that I'm going to mess up a word here and there for sure.
Trust me, I do too.
It's horrible. I think the biggest thing in my life has been when my Papa's passed away. I've talked about it on the podcast, but that moment of getting closer to that grandparent that's still here is so special. I remember, sitting with my mama on the porch and realizing that she's more than just a mama. She's had this whole life, and she's a mother, and she's a friend, and I just can't believe how special people are.
Right.
You know what I mean? Once you really start getting into it.
Right. And, there are things that I wish I could ask both my grandparents, but especially my grandma. She lost a son when he was only 2. He was run over by a car in their parking lot of their bait store. And the fact that she lived with that grief, and the way she carried herself, that also, I think, was a lesson to be learned, because, that could not have been easy as a young mom. But knowing her as I did, you wouldn't have known it. Wow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do know what you mean.
That she still had 4 other children that she had to care for, and you had to keep moving. And but yet, I there are times when I want to ask her, like, what was it like the month after?
Yeah.
The year after, right? Those kinds of things that I didn't have a reason to ask her when I was 25, right?
Right. And now you have that.
Yeah,
reason.
I do. Yeah.
I wrote a song a couple years ago, and one of the lines says, she's a mother trying to fight every battle. Though not all hers, she carries them on her back. Mm-hmm. She's the glue that keeps the family together, but she falls to pieces behind their back. Mm. And, it's those moments where she's in her own by herself. And it's amazing how strong and resilient women and mothers and just people are really.
Right.
People get to know you in the heart, and they can already hear it so much. Tell me a little bit about your daughter.
Well, let me back up a little bit though before that, because I think it's important to kind of know the context of the importance of community.
Yes, ma'am.
Because community for me is it is no matter where I go. I think building that community and having a sense of community is critical in all aspects of my life, whether it's where I live, whether it's, where I choose to worship, or the people I hang out with, or even my classroom. I think that for me is really important. And so I grew up in North Manchester, right? I mentioned that Dad moved us back to North Manchester because he had a support group. And by that I mean there were probably 3 or 4 women that he was really good friends with, older women, more grandmotherly than anything, who really took him in as their own son, but then mothered us in many ways. And I mean, like Sally Allen, who was like, she was really old when I was young. So she would call me after school. Remember, I was the oldest. I had a brother and a sister younger than I. And she would call me and she'd say, Heather, are you wearing your socks? And I would look at my bare feet and I'd say, yes, Sally, I'm wearing my socks. And then she'd say, and have you started dinner? And I would often start dinner as a 11, 12-year-old. But I had these people who checked in on me in not all the time, but there were always these people who were present. And I think that's really important. Fast forward, I married my high school sweetheart, and we chose to stay in North Manchester. I'm since divorced, but that staying in North Manchester area was really important to us because of our family. He's from the Bippus area, and I'm from North Manchester, and so staying locally was pretty important because of the people in our lives. We have 2 kids. Elizabeth was born in 1992. And then her brother Lucas was born in 1996, and they were very, very active in our communities, in plays, musicals, 4-H, athletics, dance, all of those things, and that I would say represent small town America. And I taught at Whitco High School just down the road from Manchester. For 12 years, and then after 9/11 happened, I went through this whole, what am I going to do with my life? And so I took a year off of teaching at Whitco and ended up volunteering in Elizabeth's 4th grade classroom, and stayed home that year, trying to just figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I thought I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but I was not good at that. I ended up volunteering everywhere. I was looking for gigs, to keep me busy. And I did a parents as teacher class at our church, but then I also did student teaching supervision at Manchester University, and I taught as an adjunct there. And then I never went back to teaching at Whitco because I was offered a full-time job at Manchester University. And that sense of community there as really kind of laid a foundation for what was going to happen with both of my kids. Both of our children chose to go to a small university or universities, not Purdue like their dad, even though they love Purdue University, but they both chose small universities because they wanted what they saw at Manchester and the relationship and the community building that we did with our own students there. So, and they both got it. They both found that sense of community at their own universities. I bring that up because that community aspect is a theme that runs through my whole life and played a huge role in Elizabeth's life when she was diagnosed with a brain tumor her junior year in college. Elizabeth had just landed for a semester in Copenhagen, and she FaceTimed me from the emergency room and said, Mom, I'm in the emergency room. I was like, oh, no, you're not. I said, what are you doing? And she showed me the emergency room. She said I had a seizure. And that led to about the next 24 hours trying to figure out what was going on. Should we fly over there? But within, I would say, I guess it was a couple of days, not about 24 hours later, the neurosurgeon or some doctor in Denmark was on the phone with my then husband, and I was on the phone with Elizabeth. And I heard him say brain tumor. And so I said to Elizabeth, I said, they're going to come in and tell you have a brain tumor. And she goes, well, that just stinks. Right? Can they just take it out? And I said, well, I don't know. Like, she was already like, can I get this fixed? Can I get on to my trip? But anyway, within, I want to say half an hour of finding out that she had a brain tumor, our pastor was in our house. My best friends were in my house. One was asking for our insurance cards to start the insurance process. Brian was Elizabeth's dad, and Lucas's dad was on the phone getting airline tickets. We had another colleague of mine came to my house and said, we've got food, we'll take care of Lucas, because he was a junior in high school at the time. So that sense of community really wrapped around us, and then also Elizabeth as she started this journey with a brain tumor. So that was 2014, and she ended up having a 10-hour awake craniotomy at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and spent the semester home with her parents and her brother instead of spending the semester traveling through Europe. But at that moment, she really quickly took on she loved the quote, she stood in the storm, and when the wind didn't blow her way, she adjusted her sails. And so she latched onto that adjust your sails mantra, that you can't control what nature gives you, right? She could not control the fact that she had a brain tumor, but she could control how she approached every day living with that brain tumor. And so that adjust your sails became her mantra, and really helped her think about how do I one, stay present in the moment, and how do I live life with a positive mindset. Fast forward, she went back to college. She graduated with her class, and ended up staying in Granville, Ohio area. That's where her university was. She went to Denison University in Granville, Ohio, and stayed there because she got a job working at a bank. And that's actually where she met her life partner, Will. And, having a brain tumor, it's more than just having surgery. There were follow-ups. She had to have chemo. She had to have proton radiation. But it didn't show any growth for quite a while. And then in 2019, so this is 5 years later, in October she got engaged, and a month later her MRI showed it looked like growth in her original brain tumor. And they said, you need to have another surgery. So early December of 2019, we went back up to Mayo's for surgery, and that's when we found out it wasn't growth on the original brain tumor. It was actually a second brain tumor, and she had this rare cancer of the spinal fluid called leptomeningeal disease. And left untreated, that cancer can kill you in 6 weeks. So here she was, right? She just got engaged, and she was starting to think about, what am I going to do as a young woman planning weddings, things like that. But that wasn't what nature said was going to happen in that moment. So she ended up having, she had to have 6 weeks of radiation to her head and spine, and then she had chemotherapy, and watching her navigate that at, she was 27, 28 years old. As a mom, you realize, you really raised a resilient kid, right? And it wasn't easy. Like, I don't want people to think that her journey was easy at all, or that she didn't have moments where she was really honked off, right, or sad, because we had those days. But she worked so hard at trying to stay present. We would often say, I would often ask her, what does a good day look like? And it might be pedicures, it might be coffee, it might be a walk around, this nature park that was near her. I need to back up a little bit. That was when she was first diagnosed with this second brain tumor and rare cancer of her spinal fluid. That was late 2019, and then early 2020, COVID hits. COVID allowed me to work remote. So, when the university shut down, I moved to Ohio with Elizabeth and her fiance.
Wow.
And stayed in her spare bedroom. Good friend of mine took care of my pets, and off I went. That gave me a chance to walk with her through all of this that I may not have had if COVID hadn't happened when it did, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not that I wish COVID on anybody.
No.
But that was just part of this journey, and she lived for another 2 years with this glioblastoma, and in early November of 2021, she was like, I don't want to do these treatments anymore. She was on all sorts of trials, and they were just making her really, really sick. And she said, I'm done. And I said, okay. And she said, I want to go home. And I thought, because we had been at the doctor's office, and when she decided she was going to go off all treatments, and I thought she meant back to her home where Will was. And she said, no, I want to go home. And so she and Will and their dog moved in with me in North Manchester. They came back from Ohio, and they were here for several months until she died in 2021, December 21st, 2021. So that sense of community is what brought her home. And she was surrounded by the people who loved her the most, right? She had friends that could come visit. She had a local church pastor who checked in on her. There was a point where I don't remember the timeline exactly, but probably about a month before she died, a huge group of our community showed up outside our back porch, and it was probably November, so it was cold and rainy and yucky, and they sang all of her favorite songs, and that was led by her choir director and all of the people that she grew up with doing musicals. So anyway, that's that piece of my story is not what defines who I am. And Elizabeth and I talked a lot about that, right? That it also didn't define who she was as a person. It doesn't define her brother. It doesn't define her dad. But it's a shared experience that we went through as a family that really changed. I can't speak for Lucas and Brian, although I would say it changed their perspective. But it really shifted my perspective of this world and what matters most, and what doesn't really matter at all, right? Like the little things that sometimes we get hung up on really waste a lot of our energy. So
it's such like a powerful story, and though you say it doesn't define you, and that's completely true, I don't I'm trying to get the right words.
No. Okay, so it doesn't define me, but it has become my life mission.
Life mission is what I was trying.
So I think I don't know if I said this earlier, but some people call me a Pollyanna. I am not a Pollyanna. I don't think everything is people. You asked me how I was when I was growing up. I'm very positive. I'm a positive person. I take roadblocks pretty well because I see them as something I need to overcome, or I need to figure out how to get around them if I have an idea that I want to implement. Couple of people in my life have called me Pollyanna, like I have rose-colored glasses. I'm like, I don't know if I have rose-colored glasses. I've seen a lot of reality, right? My parents got divorced when I was 10. I was raised by a single dad who was trying to make ends meet. I had a child who died from brain cancer. So life has not been rosy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I have figured out that I have one shot at every day. And if I don't use that day, then it's gone. Like I never get to go back and make up for things that have happened. So Elizabeth used to always say, and I still need to get this as a t-shirt, but Elizabeth always used to say, I wish I didn't have a brain tumor, but wishing it doesn't make it so, right? I wish I still had my daughter with me, but that doesn't make it so. I can't change the fact that this happened. But what I can do is I can figure out, how do I use what I learned as a human being, as a mom, as a woman? How do I use that to move forward and, one, make this world a better place for other people, whatever that looks like. But how do I empower other people to realize you have one shot at everything? And so how do we stay present and in the moment, so that we're not hung up on what happened a long time ago or even yesterday? And there's so many different ways you can go with that. But I, along with Elizabeth's brother and her dad and her best friends and her fiance, we started a foundation called the Heather Schilling Adjust Your Sales Foundation Incorporated. And we have two primary pillars. One is to raise money for brain cancer research, because research depends on small research projects, often done independently, in smaller labs that then lead to bigger, more federal funding. So that piece has been really important to us. But then also, how do we empower people to face life's difficult challenges, because they're going to happen. Right? You can't get through life without bad things happening. Right. So those two pillars really drive this foundation. And while my daughter's death doesn't define me, it has lit inside me a fire of how do I grow this foundation so that we can help more people. And so it's my passion project, growing this foundation. And in December, actually on her birthday, December 22nd of this last year, several of the board members, we delivered a check to the James Cancer Center at Ohio State University, and we have fully funded an endowment in Elizabeth's name. It's called the Heather Schilling Neuro-Oncology Research Fund at the James Cancer Center. And as long as Ohio State is a university, and as long as they have a research clinic there, they will be doing research using Elizabeth's endowment.
Wow.
So we raised $100,000 in under 2 years to create this endowment. Yeah, so it's become my passion project.
What an amazing feat, to do that. And I'm sitting here and I'm listening to the second pillar of inspiring other people to get through it, to realize that there is a way through it, and to empower them.
Right.
How are you doing that day to day, as a mom, as a friend, as a sister, as somebody who has experienced this?
I think I probably have always done this as an educator. And, I started teaching in 1990, so last year's my 35th year of teaching. Wow. I know. That's awesome. 35 years, really? I know every once in a while people say, when are you going to retire? I'm like, what? What are you talking about? I don't think I'm going to ever retire. They'll have to tell me to go somewhere else. But one of my philosophies as an educator is not giving answers to kids, but giving them the tools to figure out the answers. Right? So giving big open-ended questions, whether I was teaching high school history and English, or whether I teach, college education classes, giving big open-ended questions that there may not be a specific answer to, and helping them figure out, how do I even start answering this question? Giving them those skills, developing those skills through project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, those kinds of methods of teaching, empower them to find answers. And also to realize that maybe there's not one answer. Maybe there are multiple answers, or maybe there's not a specific answer. So that's one way. I think the other way that I empower people, I love to write notes to people, encouraging notes. I like to have coffee with students or friends. I know that not everybody has a positive way of looking at things, and getting big news that changes the trajectory of what you thought life was going to be like is not easy. But again, I'm going to go back to that sense of community, right? Realizing that you have people who are there for you, give you strength to face some of the things that are really hard to face, right? And I do a lot of, when students, I'm going to just talk about my students for now. I teach college students.
Now, what do you teach?
So I am a professor of education at Manchester University in the Haney Department of Education. It is one of the best things that you could possibly do. And here's why. And I've always loved teaching, whether it was high school students or it's working with college students. Watching them realize they're not as helpless as they thought they were, right? That we really have more control over things in our life than we often think, because we can make decisions that impact the way we approach things. And, the conversation sometimes, students who maybe didn't do well on an assignment or a test, we talk about how that moment doesn't define who you are, but how you approach that moment defines who you are. That one singular event doesn't define you. I always give the example of I failed my midterm psychology degree or my psychology test at Purdue. I stayed up all night trying to read the chapters. I may as well have gone to bed. Would have gotten the same grade. That F on that midterm did not define who I was, right? I'm not a failure. I failed that test. And so there's a difference in how you approach that. I don't know if that makes sense. But having those conversations with students, I think, is probably the biggest way that I try to empower other people. Giving them opportunities to realize that they can do big things themselves. So, for example, this last spring, I had 3 college students. They came to me and they said, we want to organize a 5K. And I said, you want to run a 5K? And they said, no, we want to organize a 5K. We want to run it, but we want to organize it, and we want to organize a 5K that's going to benefit your foundation.
Oh, wow.
And so here these 3 young women are who had no clue how to organize a 5K. I didn't know how to organize a 5K, but we started working together. Okay, here are some things that here's some people we need to contact. And, we met a couple of times. They successfully implemented a 5K early May. They called it the Go Gray in May 5K for brain cancer research. And they raised close to $1,200 on a Saturday morning.
Wow.
And that event, now those 3 young women know they can do something like that, right? It's like, oh, I do have more control over things. I do have some agency. I can make some things happen. So I guess that's...
No, I love that.
I really never think about how I do it.
No.
I just try to bring positivity into the world.
Well, it's genuine. And I think because you are a teacher, it's at the heart of every teacher.
I was born to be a teacher.
You knew, so
I knew in 8th grade I was going to be a teacher.
How cool is that?
Yeah, I knew. I just knew.
And see, that's what I mean to my listeners, when you're sitting across the table from somebody who truly has a heart for people, it just shines through, whether you can see their face or whether you just listen to their voice, but you can definitely hear it in Heather's voice. And what I want to pull out and ask you, because the power of what I would call a testimony of just the backbone and the resilience that you have had to be able to be not only an influence to your students, but the people around you, and continually build community, because you have felt the impact of community. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I want to do with this podcast is build a community that seems to some people is fading, that don't have somebody to talk to or don't have somebody to listen when they have something going on in their life. Can I ask you, when somebody comes to you and talks to you maybe about their own personal hardship that they're going through, is there a balance between saying, I've been there, or just listening? You know, sharing your story and listening. Is there a balance that you have that you've found as somebody that people may come to?
That's a really good question. That's a hard question, right? Because I think, I think if they know your story or a little bit of your story, it gives a sense of security in knowing that you've been there. I hesitate to say that, right? Like I think about some of the students that I've talked with, and sometimes, and let me back up a little bit too, before I get into a bigger answer to this question. Because I like to be active and engaged in my community, after both of my kids graduated, and they were very active kids, right? I said, 4-H, they were in athletics, they were in all sorts of extracurriculars. We always had people at our house. Friday night after basketball games, after football games, Lucas, all of his guys, they still gather at my house at Thanksgiving. So, and he's going to be 30. Oh. And that's what I always wanted, I think, as a young kid, is I wanted our house to be the house where everyone gathered. Where was I going with this? I was going somewhere with this. Oh, I know. And so after both of our kids graduated from high school and went off to college, I had some time, and I have been adopted by the women's basketball team at Manchester, and I'm their team mom. And sometimes that gives me a different opportunity to talk with young people who might be struggling with that transition between high school and college. But I think there's also this isn't necessarily related to basketball, but because I was raised by a single dad, and I've been pretty open by that. I mean, I have a good relationship with my mom, but being raised by a single parent is not easy, especially by a single dad when you're the only one being raised by a single dad, right? But that experience gave me a different skill set and a different understanding that often resonates with young people who maybe have parents who are going through divorce. Also, having gone through a divorce myself gives me a different perspective, but then also, having raised a child or two kids and then having one die from a terminal disease also gives me perspective. So students, I think when they come to me, they know enough about my story that they know that I'm not making stuff up, right? So you asked, there's a balance between, listening and talking. So I think somehow you have to be able to share enough of yourself so that there's this sense of security that they can talk to you. That has to be established, and I would say that's true, actually in any relationship, right? Yeah. I think listening to what they have to say, and then acknowledging and affirming them, that our emotions are emotions, right? We get to feel what we feel. And then somehow offering ideas on how they might be able to take some ownership of a situation, how they might be able to shift their mindset so that they can approach whatever's going on in their life with a different perspective. That's not easy to do, but I have found that it's not talking at, it's the asking of the questions.
Oh.
right? Like you've just asked some questions that have opened up a conversation.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens when I'm talking with a college kid, or when I would talk with a high school student, or when I'm talking with my best friends, right? Just asking some open-ended questions that lead them almost to their own answer.
Oh yeah, like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. I think that so yes, sharing part of your own story establishes that trustworthiness, that sense of we have something in common. I'm not just making this up, right? That idea, that sense of security. But then empowering them comes from asking the questions and leading them to their own understanding. I will never tell a student or a friend or a loved one, this is what you should do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I don't have that prescription. I'm not that kind of a doctor, right? I cannot give you a prescription and how to fix your problems. But I can help you consider options and ways to approach something that might empower you.
So it's coming alongside this whole idea of community, coming alongside and saying, hey, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And I'm here. Is basically what we want to do as a community. The second part to that question is, a lot of people want to help people in situations, but they don't want to step on toes. They don't want to feel like and vice versa, of like, as somebody going through something, you don't want to feel like a burden. And then you also, as the community around you, don't want to bother or step in a place that might feel out of boundary to that relationship to the person. And you talked about community really rallying and how you're rallying around.
Yeah.
I want to ask, what is your advice as somebody who was sitting in their house and going through this, and as much as you were with other people, you still had to be there alone and with your thoughts in your mind. What would you tell somebody who wants to help their friend or wants to be there for somebody? What are some things that you wish you would tell them? Because a lot of people I've heard say, just do it anyway. If they have too many casseroles, they have too many casseroles. If they don't want company, they'll just tell you. But to show up to your door will mean the world to that person just for that second. What would you say to a community really wanting to rally?
This is so timely. I just had a phone call last week from someone who asked that same question.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, she asked the same question, and my answer is, it's kind of complicated, right? It depends on how well you know the person, and showing up to clean out flower beds, those kinds of things I think are important. Following your instinct is important to do, and whether my colleague and I have this approach to working with our students. We use the Martin Luther King quote, "Seek to sit where others sit," and that applies to everything in life, including this, right? We can't imagine what it would be like if we haven't gone through the experience, right? If you have never had to sit with a child or a loved one who has a terminal illness, then you don't know what it's like, right? Like I didn't know what it was like until it's happening. But it's okay to show up. It's okay to show up. I think that's what I kind of rambled along there, but I think in my experience, showing up is important. The loneliest part of being a parent or a caregiver of someone who has a terminal illness or who's going through just a really rough time, right? Like it doesn't have to be someone who's dying, but we all have moments in our life where things are really rough. And I think it's human nature to feel like there's something wrong with us, right? That maybe there's something wrong with me, that I'm struggling. I should be able to handle this. I should be stronger. But it's not, right? It's part of our existence is we have struggles. That's just who That's just what it's like to be a human. And what matters is when the neighbor comes over, can just leave a casserole on the, doesn't have to visit, right? Yeah, I don't know. That's a really tricky question. And I never quite know how to answer it because it really depends on the relationship. I think you can't go wrong if you send a card, if you send a message, if you just say, I'm going to drop off dinner Thursday night.
And leave it there.
And leave it there. What I'd also like to say to the people on the receiving end, it's okay to take the meal and then donate to someone else. Right? It's like you don't have to, don't feel like you need to use everything that's given to you. I mean, Elizabeth received a lot of gifts, right? A lot of gifts. And they were all heartfelt gifts.
Yeah.
And she loved banana Laffy Taffy. Do you know how much banana Laffy Taffy that girl received when she was going through her different treatments? Or blankets. And I mean, because our human nature is we care for people, and we want to give. And I would say keep giving, right?
Yeah.
The gift for the giver is in the giving.
Yeah.
And the gift for the receiver is knowing that people care, right?
Yeah.
That gift, if you don't need 7 blankets, it's okay to re-gift them. It's okay to give them to a shelter. It's okay to do that, right? It's the gift that keeps on giving. But I would say don't hesitate. Don't hesitate to give. And I don't think you can send too many cards. I think that's, when you talk about lost, a lost art. I like that our communities are coming back. I feel like, I think about Wabash County and the things that are happening in Wabash County, both in Wabash and in North Manchester. And as somebody who's lived here her whole life, I'm really excited. So I see it coming back, but I also think there's this lost art of sending a note, of writing a thank you note, of sending a card that says I'm thinking about you. Those things matter. You can write it on a piece of notebook paper, right? But those things matter. And as we, navigate this world of technology and lost face-to-face time, I think that lost art is important to bring back.
Yes.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. No,
I feel like I was
lovely.
rambling there.
No, it was lovely. I was thinking about while you were speaking and just taking it in because, I want to be a good person. Like I want to care and I want to be there for people. I want to make time for people. I want that. I want to be a good human being in this world and make a difference in this world. And, there are so many things that will stop us from doing what we know is the right thing to do, right? And we'll get in our heads or we'll think, oh, this isn't enough, or I'm not doing enough for this person. But in actuality, I always say actuality. I know that's not how it's said, okay?
That's all right.
I always say it. It's never going to leave me. But in all actuality, it's this idea of when someone takes the time even to write a note on a ripped piece of paper or a bubblegum wrapper that says I love you or I'm thinking about you, I've kept those things because I needed that in that moment, and it means the world to me. And I love that you say just do it. Just, just do it. Don't hesitate because it's important. There's so much. Oh my gosh, there's so much I could talk to you about.
I do think it's important that we, right, the gift is in the giving. So the receiver gets something, but you as the giver also receive something, right? Because it's about showing that you care, that you love them, that you're thinking about them, right? So it's not necessarily a gift. It is a gift that somebody receives, but it really is in the giving that also is the biggest gift.
Right. Well, and it makes you feel as though you're doing something that will not only help that person, but also establish even further character within yourself. Because, it's not about the giver necessarily, right? Because, like you said, it's this juxtaposition of that. But it is this thing that establishes something within you that says, wow, that felt good. It feels good to know that, you know what?
Right. Well, I think you brought something up that's important also, right? How do we just be good people, right? And I think the older you get, the more you realize, oh, I do have an impact. My words matter. My actions matter. I think we try to teach little kids that, but the older you get, the more you realize, oh, I do have an impact. The way I speak to somebody at the grocery store, the way I, react to somebody on the road, that all matters, and we may not know how much it matters. There's a poet, Mary Oliver,
Yes.
who has a poem that she asks, "What are you going to do with this one wild and precious life?"
I know that.
Right,
one.
and that poem. That poem just resounds on so many levels because, again, it goes back to that idea of your mindset and being, what's your intention with this life that you have, and how do you live each day as fully as you possibly can, even on the bad days, right? How do we as humans, how do we live in the present, and how do we leave this world a better place than we found it?
Yeah. And I think that's a question each one of us answers in our own way. And like, as far
Absolutely.
as, especially everybody's purpose, everybody has a purpose in their life, right? And I feel like everybody's purpose is to fulfill something that another person can't, until the next person come along. I heard this quote where it talks about the people that lay sidewalks, that we might not ever know the people's names who lay one little flat of sidewalk, but it took somebody one step closer. And it was these people who choose to create a path for somebody. And I think as friends and mothers and sisters and all the things, and brothers and everything in between, we're able to create paths that somebody can say, like, turn around and disciple somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think we've lost that discipleship, whether in the church sense, but also in a life sense. Just in general, being a good friend to somebody.
Right.
We've lost that discipleship of a mentor or whatever it might be. And I've had a lot of mentors in my life. And one thing that you do is you talk about being about the adopt basketball player. Is that what you said? Tell us, give us a brief summary of just that, because that makes a big impact.
Are you talking about the Grand Spartans?
Yes.
Okay, so this is something that began. Gosh, I don't know. You'd have to ask Coach Zurich, who's the women's basketball coach. It began decades ago, and it is a program. I hate to call it a program because it's so organic. It's not like a formal program, but it came out of a need, I think, again, in a community, connecting the residents at Timbercrest, which is a retirement community, and the women's basketball players. When you're at college and you're away from home, you might miss your grandparents, maybe sometimes more than your parents. Who knows? But that relationship has continued several decades later, where you have women's basketball players and residents at Timbercrest who are called the Grand Spartans. So like grandparents, but Grand Spartans. And every basketball player has one or two Grand Spartans. And we do dinners together at Timbercrest. We play games. We do crafts. The women's basketball team decorated the Christmas tree for them. And then many of the Grand Spartans, if they're physically able, will come over on a bus to all of our home games. So, and they have a special seat, and I give them little, name tags and stuff. Yeah, because it's a really, for me, it's so cool. Because remember, I started talking about my grandma and what an important piece that she played in my life, but that relationship between the elderly and the young is a relationship that our society doesn't value.
Right.
Like many other, at least like other societies, I think in the past have valued that reverence for the elderly, and that they have something to contribute.
Yes.
And I think that, for me, watching that relationship between these retired individuals And some are not young. Some are like 90 some years old, 96 years old. And they have so much love and passion for watching those young women play basketball. And it's not just about the basketball, it's about, again, who they are as young people.
Wow.
And that sense of who they are as people. It's just such a cool relationship to watch on so many levels.
That's the epitome of what I see here in my time doing, bridging that gap between
Yeah.
generations, sitting down with the young and the old and telling stories. I miss that. And I love that. I think there's something that to be said. My mom was an activities director in a nursing home for years. And one of the things that you learn is that sometimes they don't feel like they have a purpose anymore, or they don't understand what their role is anymore.
Right.
And now that gives somebody purpose to come and watch somebody play a
Right.
game and support them. And, a lot of them probably feel like they're their own grandkids,
Oh, yeah.
right?
They'll say, that's my girl.
Yeah.
That's my girl.
And it's so cool, that program. That's an amazing program. And this is why it's so important to talk to people such as yourself and to share stories like that, because some people don't realize I wouldn't have known that exists. And I love that it does.
Yeah.
And what can people do to help support some of those programs? Is there a way that we can help support
Oh
these
gosh,
programs?
I've never been asked that before.
Maybe
I don't know.
so.
Maybe email me at the university or contact Carol Gebert.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
see. Yeah.
It's low overhead. I mean, it doesn't
Right,
take a lot of
right.
money because we might maybe make meals or whatever, but I don't know. Would be really cool is if other places started those kinds of programs. Like
Yeah.
there's no reason why a high school couldn't start it with a local retirement community. Something else I do besides that Grand Spartans, and that Grand Spartans is not my idea. I mean, that was not
No, but it's a part of it. Yeah.
that's part of the legacy.
Yeah.
And I think I love legacy. I love the idea of whose shoulders are we standing on, and what impact are we having for the next generations, and realizing that we're part of this long line of human beings who've inhabited this earth for millions of however long we've been here, right? So something else I do as an educator, we have a class at Manchester in our department called Professional Learning Communities, and so we have all of our education majors at the same time on Fridays. So they have an opportunity the seniors get to know the juniors and the sophomores.
Oh, wow.
So that you don't graduate without knowing the people who are in your major, other than just in your class,
yeah.
right? That was important to us. But something I do with our juniors is I do this whole thing on legacy. And who are you as an educator? Who are the educators that came before you? And what are you building on? And what is your legacy? What is your part in this legacy? And I take our junior education majors to Timbercrest, and they interview retired educators.
Wow.
And what's funny is, and I didn't realize this because the older I get, I feel like, some of the elderly there are my best friends. Like, I just love hanging out at Timbercrest, partly because my dad's there, but I've really, I have a whole new appreciation for that population. But sometimes young people are afraid, right? I think we're afraid of how to talk to other people, especially people who are not our age, who don't have the shared experience. So I try to do a little bit of prep work about, talking about who the people are that they're going to interview, and maybe where they've been. But taking them there on the same day, and having them record these interviews, and then they take those interviews and they turn them into their own kind of a project, whatever they decide they want to do, whether it's an art project, a a piece of music, whatever. They do something that represents those educators' lives. The feedback I get from them, from the students, is that that's one of their very favorite projects, because it gives them an opportunity to again go back and sit where other people sit, right? To see this vocation that they're choosing, this vocation of teaching, that they get to see it from a different person's point of view, right? And I think that's really important. And then it also allows, I'm really big on, I want people to feel heard and seen and valued, whether it's a conversation that we have at coffee or whether it's, in a phone conversation. I want the other person to feel valued, and that conversation between those college students and these retired teachers who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, it allows those people, our retired community, to feel valued. And for me, that's really important.
Oh, that huge right here for me. Obviously, as I sit down and I talk to a lot of different generations throughout this, my best friends are 80 and 90 years old. Those are my best friends.
They're so smart, aren't they?
They're insane, and they can run circles around me. And
they've learned that, so what if that happens?
Yeah. No,
they don't
they're
sweat
just
it.
So cool. But, the thing you're talking about is sharing stories, right? And documenting people's life. Obviously, as a documentarian, that's something that I'm passionate about. And one of the things that this is meant to inspire, that second pillar is to inspire for you to tell your story.
Right.
My listeners to tell their story.
Right.
Because they can make an impact. And the people who don't think it's fascinating, because a lot of people say, well, I don't have a very interesting life. I never really did, I'm like, you're so wrong. I always tell people so wrong. There's so much to a person that is deep and passionate and beautiful and is worthy of telling, because you have no idea what a story can do for somebody.
Right.
For somebody coming along.
A piece might resonate with them.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. I hate to end the conversation because this has been so good, but I have to ask one last question.
Okay.
And I want you to give your best piece of advice to somebody both younger and older. What would be is it separate advice or is it the same advice? What would you give advice to?
It's the same advice, and it's what I tell everyone. You have one shot at every day, one shot at every moment, and it takes some practice, but you really can be as fully present as you possibly can. It might take some time for some people. I used to be a horrible ruminator. Right, I would be hung up on like what happened last week, but I can't go back and change last week. And you have one shot at every day. And when I wake up in the morning, I try to set an intention. Today I want to, and then I state it, whether that's to my dog or whether that's out into the universe or it's on a piece of paper. But if we can, as a society, if we can start to think about how can we fully be in the moment, how can we be present with the people in our lives, it really makes a difference in how we live this life, right? It really makes a difference, as Mary Oliver says, how we live this wild and precious life.
Yes.
Because that's all we've got.
Yeah.
Once it's over, it's over.
I love it. I have to ask you one more. I always say this.
That's okay.
What's your legacy? What legacy do you want to leave behind? Since you're so passionate about legacy, what would you want your legacy to be?
I want people to feel, really, I want them to feel empowered. I want them to think, when I'm gone, I want them to think about me as being the person who made them believe that anything was possible, and that we're all worthy of leading really great lives.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for
You're
being
welcome.
you and sharing your story and just being as passionate as you are.
Well, thanks.
It's always a pleasure to sit across the table from somebody like you and learn from you and pull from you and be inspired by you. So
Thank you. I'm glad you're doing this.
thank you.
I really am.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everything, really. I do. I will stop. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode because I sincerely did. I am incredibly inspired every single time someone walks into my studio and sits down. I am able to look in their eyes and I am welcomed into their story, and that is priceless. It is a great honor and also a great responsibility to think that when they said yes to come onto my podcast, that meant that they trusted me. They trusted me enough to allow me to help tell their story, and to me, that means the world. So thank you to my guest. If you'd like to connect with my guest, if they left any or mentioned any of social media or websites, it will be in the description box below, as well as on my Facebook and Instagram if you want to see what they look like. I have a portrait and a small little write-up along with anything they mentioned within this podcast. So I hope today that you have been inspired to look at your own life and to see that just living your life is important. But I want to inspire you as well to actually document your life. You have an importance in this world, and I want you to use your voice. So it doesn't have to look like 6 pages in a journal or being on a podcast. It can look like a line a day. If you'd like to connect with me, make sure you head over to hereinmytime.com. That is where I have a bi-weekly blog, as well as some of my portfolio work with photography, and where you can also contact me through email at hereinmytime@gmail.com, as well as follow me on Facebook and Instagram. This is at hereinmytime as well, here.inmytime for Instagram, and I have weekly content. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world. And until next week,